Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Coco and Daltz. I'm not Daltz.
And I'm not Coco.
You love using that voice.
I do.
And today we're going to talk about another movie that was nominated for Best Picture at this year's Oscars, which we both finally just got around to seeing almost a year after it was originally released in theaters, and that would be Dunkirk.
Dunkirk is a war movie. It takes place in the Second World War.
Which was 1939 to 1945-ish.
And this particular version of Dunkirk takes place in the beaches of northern France. Or France, as I like to say.
Because you're Canadian.
Because I'm Canadian, I like to be pretentious about my French. And so the story is for those four people out there who are listening and might not know, it involves the British Army being backed into a corner on the coast of France in the continental European area known as France, he said redundantly.
We're taping this at like 10:30 in the morning, so we have not been drinking yet, just FYI.
This is just the way we are all the time. So the British Army needs to get back to England. They need to cross the Channel. They're in dire need of some transportation. And so then Winston Churchill, who was in a very good movie that I saw earlier this year about Winston Churchill, he's not in this movie. He's not in Dunkirk. You don't see him, but he makes the decision that he needs to enlist a flotilla of you like that?
Yeah.
Of private boats and ships and such like that will bring the troops back to England. How's that for a summary? You said I was good at summaries. I don't think that was a very good summary.
Do we need to start over again?
So that's the movie. It's a Christopher Nolan production.
Better known for Memento and The Dark Knight Rises, Batman Begins, Inception.
So I know you're a huge Anglophile. What did you think of Dunkirk, Coco?
Well, I liked it more than you did. I didn't love it, but I enjoyed it. It focused on there were three different storylines. There was the storyline of one family who was in one of the little boats who were driving the boat over from England to get the troops. There was another storyline of the RAF pilots who were trying to shoot down the German bombers who were trying, as you mentioned, all the army guys on the beaches, they were just sitting ducks. There was no cover, and the Germans would dive bomb them, and
they were lined up to get on boats. They
right.
I don't like to use the word literally very much, but they were literally lined up on the beaches in this movie.
Well, since we're talking about English people, we should say they were queuing to line up on.
Right. They were queuing for the tube.
For the boats, yeah. So there was the people on the boat. There was Tom Hardy and two other RAF pilots in the air trying to take down the German dive bombers. And then there were the army guys on the beach just waiting to be rescued. And
the French and the German army is closing in on them from the south.
They, once again, literally only have the beach. Like, the entire town of Dunkirk is pretty much just overrun with Nazis. So there wasn't a whole lot of dialogue in really about the first half of the movie. So initially I was sort of confused because until those three storylines kind of converged time-wise, a little more than, say, halfway through the movie, which was less than 2 hours. I thought it was going to be like a 2.5, 3 hour, like, epic Saving Private Ryan-like war movie. But it was really about an hour 45. So until those three storylines converged a bit more than halfway through the movie, I was a little confused because you'd see Tom Hardy in the plane and it's broad daylight. And then you'd cut to Harry Styles and the army guys in a boat that's torpedoed and it's midnight. And so I was a little confused, but then I figured out what was going on. So I didn't mind the lack of dialogue, though. We mentioned this before we started taping. Christopher Nolan being British and having both British and American citizenship, he kind of gave the audience credit for knowing history and knowing the story of the little boats, which maybe he shouldn't have done because I read contemporaneous reviews saying...
What was that word again?
Contemporaneous.
Wow.
There's a shot for you, people who do shots and we use big words.
That's at 11 o'clock in the morning.
I know.
And no coffee.
I know, no coffee.
Wow. I'm astounded. This is a momentous occasion right now.
So apparently people didn't actually know the story of the little boats, which just astounds me because I don't know how you can make it through a history class that remotely talks about the highlights of World War II and not hear about that. But
I wonder how much people today, kids today, I wonder how much they really know about the Second World War.
Yeah, I mean, the public school system has changed so much in the 24 years since I graduated, even though I'm only 29 years old.
Well, and we're looking at almost 80 years since the war.
Right. Like, when I graduated high school, it was only 50 years since the war's end. So it was still... There were still a lot of veterans around. It was still fresh in a lot of people's memories.
And we've had a lot of things happen since then that have dominated the psyche, like 9/11, for example, and some of the other things that I think today's youth will look back at as being momentous historical occasions. But there was nothing bigger than the Second World War. I mean, in the last century, 2 centuries, it was a pretty decisive deal.
Yeah, so
and this is now the history podcast that you're listening to. No longer culture and entertainment.
So what did you think of the movie?
So the movie was nominated for several Academy Awards. It won 3 for Best Achievement in Film Editing, Sound Editing, and Sound Mixing. It was nominated for Motion Picture of the Year, Directing, Cinematography, Production Design, and Music for Motion Pictures. I saw several of the movies that were nominated for Best Picture in the previous Academy Awards. I thought it was my least favorite.
Wow.
The Shape of Water, of course, won as Best Picture. I saw The Darkest Hour, which I thought was fantastic. It was a completely different version of the same story. It was Winston Churchill coming to grips with losing a little bit of Europe in Second World War. So I thought that was fantastic. I much preferred that as opposed to Dunkirk. Dunkirk was a war movie that didn't have a lot of real war feel to it. So there were people that were lying on the beaches that were supposed to be... There were soldiers lying on the beaches that were supposed to be dead, but they didn't look dead. They just kind of looked like they were resting quietly. There was no blood anywhere. There was no... Horrors of war were not evident. I mean, the tension was there. And when the German planes were dive bombing and that sort of thing, there was a lot of tension and there was a lot of horrific sounds and things like that. But there wasn't, to me... a war movie. Now, when I say that, I'm not a gore guy. Like, it doesn't need to be gory. I don't go to a lot of gory movies. But this just didn't feel like a war movie to me. The war movie to me, you mentioned Saving Private Ryan, that sort of is the high watermark, I think, for a lot of war movies. That was just awful. It was just graphic.
Right, the first half hour.
The first half hour, the scene in the beach right at the beginning there, and director Steven Spielberg actually enlisted some people, or maybe that's a bad word to use, but... He had cast some people who were amputees, and they played roles in it. So when somebody's arm got blown off, you saw the person's the remainder of their arm, and so that was a real life kind of feel to it. It added a lot to the movie. This felt like a Disney war movie to me. It felt like it was...
Well, hot take from Dolls.
I'm upset. It just didn't feel like a war movie to me. There was a lot of really good tension and a lot of good drama in there, and the suspense was good. With the music, and there's a scene where the soldiers are hiding out in a boat, and they're waiting for the tide to rise to float the boat out into sea so they can escape, and then the German snipers are pinging off the boat and that sort of thing. There was a lot of tension and suspense there, and they're trying to plug the holes in the boat. That was really well done, but I think that and it was very claustrophobic, and you felt the water overwhelming them and that sort of thing. But I don't know, I just didn't... I didn't see it. I've read a lot of reviews about it, obviously, and we've encountered a lot of it around the Oscar nominations, and it didn't float my boat.
Oh, look at you! Look what you did there. I see that.
You see that? That wasn't obvious.
Well, I'm gonna do a little bit of an aside here before I get back to talking about the movie. Christopher Nolan knows how to use music in movies.
Yes,
like you just mentioned the music in Dunkirk. Another hot take. I thought the original score for Inception should have won over Trent Reznor winning for The Social Network.
Yeah.
Like, I thought the music in Inception was fantastic, and The Social Network was just kind of like a boring... I didn't think it added anything to the movie itself. So Christopher Nolan, he knows how to use music in...
And this is not... My hot take is not taking away from his talent. Obviously, it's a very impressive feat to do what he did with the German Air Force. I mean, I know there's a lot of special effects and things like that.
Right.
But the tension and the realism was very good. There was one scene where the Spitfire dove into the ocean, and it looked like I had drawn it. It wasn't very well done. And to me, that was a bit of a fail in this kind of epic scale and epic size movie. That was like, oh, I can see the strings in the special effects, like that kind of thing.
Right.
And so that would sort of put me off a little bit. But overall, yeah, like the guy has done, we look at his career as a writer, Dunkirk, Interstellar, Man of Steel, The Dark Knight Rises, Inception, The Dark Knight, The Prestige, Batman Begins, Memento. I mean, those are some pretty amazing screenplays.
In 20 years, he's had a pretty epic body of work.
Right, and Memento was 2000.
Wow.
So not even 20 years, yeah. I mean, that's a pretty impressive body of work right there.
And you were talking about the horrors of war not being shown. Like, I admit, I know the story of Dunkirk. I know they evacuated hundreds of thousands of people, but I just kept waiting for, like, that DOS boat moment. Like, a couple of the characters, like, did die. Because, I mean, it's a war movie. Not everybody can survive. But right. I kept waiting for the people who crashed their planes into the water to not live. But they lived. And, I just kept waiting for that DOS boat, like, realistic war moment where lots of... And, I mean, there were, like, boats that got torpedoed and there were bodies floating in the water, but it wasn't the main characters that we got to know.
Yep.
Only a couple of those guys died, and everybody else lived. And then they have the war in their minds that are going to be going on. But still,
there's a lot of horror in this movie. It's just not. Maybe that's just me being conditioned to mainstream Hollywood movies where you've got to see somebody's arm get blown off in order to believe that there's a war going on. But it just didn't feel realistic in that sense to me. And like I said, it felt like it was a kind of a homogenized. And when the credits started rolling at the beginning, and I saw that it was a PG-13 movie, I couldn't believe it. It's like, wait a minute, there's a violent Dunkirk story going on here, and it's okay for kids to go to. Like, it's a war movie. It should be awful. You should taste the grit of the sand in your teeth.
And instead, probably at least your older kid probably could watch it because it really wasn't that violent for being a war movie. Although I mean. The whole story is about the guys sitting on the beach waiting to get evacuated. So, I mean, you've got the Germans dive bombing them and stuff, but there's really, like, even when the bodies blow up, you don't see, like, a headland on the beach next to the main guy. It's just, there's a big poof of sand, and now there's no body there.
Maybe it was just too subtle for me. Maybe that was what it was, and I was not prepared for that. And maybe that's why some people are praising it, because it's of its subtlety. It's
a war movie without the horrors of war.
Right. Maybe that's what Christopher Nolan was going for, because he's a talented guy and he's obviously got some thoughts in mind when he goes into these things. But yeah, like they're all lined up on the beaches. The Luftwaffe comes in to strafe the beach. They strafe the beach, and then while they're strafing the beach, all the soldiers drop. And then when the planes go away, the soldiers stand up again, and some guys don't stand up. And maybe that was too subtle. It's like, well, we're supposed to make the conclusion, obviously, that they're no longer alive.
Right.
But then when they pan the beach, it's guys lying down on the sand like they're just taking a break. They're just too tired to line up anymore.
It's every guy at like 3:00 in your office who's like, all right, time for a smoke break. And
it's like Costanza taking a nap underneath his desk at 3:00, right? Like that's just about what it was.
Yeah.
But
well, I was actually surprised. I didn't realize there were going to be a lot of big name people in it. I didn't realize Tom Hardy was in it. I didn't realize Mark Rylance was in it.
And tell the users who those guys play.
Tom Hardy is one of the RAF pilots. He's the last one standing, and at the end, he is actually
No, but don't spoil it.
Okay, fine. So Tom Hardy, he's the RAF pilot.
Tom Hardy's in it.
Mark Rylance is the owner of one of the little boats that goes to Dunkirk to evacuate some soldiers. He actually won an Oscar for Bridge of Spies for supporting actor a few years ago. He's big with Shakespeare's Globe in the UK. He was in Wolf Hall, an adaptation.
And he was BFG, wasn't he?
BFG?
Wasn't he in that kids movie? Now we're going to have to look it up.
Okay.
Keep talking.
So So I knew Harry Styles from
Yeah,
One Direction.
BFG, the Disney movie.
I have no idea what that is.
Yeah.
I don't watch kids' movies, you know that. Daltz is now showing me the poster for it, and I still have no idea what it is. So
He was BFG, people.
okay. So Harry Styles I knew was in it because he was in One Direction, and there was a big brouhaha made when he got cast about he's a pop star, can he act? I thought
He was
did
fine.
Yeah, he was fine. I thought he did a convincing job. He didn't stick out like a lot of people.
There wasn't a lot of acting in this movie.
Yeah, there really wasn't, and there wasn't a ton of dialogue, like
No.
you said. So.
Kenneth Branagh was acting,
Yeah,
and
Kenneth
he was
Branagh
great
was in it,
as usual. But I had a hard time, and maybe this is because I'm old, but I had a hard time understanding the dialogue. And
Yeah, the accents were very thick.
it wasn't just the accents; it was also the muddied mix. I think too. You know, because there was a lot of ambient sounds. Obviously, during war, there was explosions and gunfire and
the
screams
waves.
and
The constant waves on the
the
beach,
constant
yeah.
waves on the beach, exactly. And so there was a lot of sound there that just didn't work for me. Now the Academy disagrees with me because the sound was the most celebrated part of this movie, according to them. But I had a hard time just following along. I knew the story and I knew what the roles were. The other thing too that I don't know if this was intentional or not, but you never see the Germans in the movie.
Right.
You see the planes, and you see some gunfire.
At the end with Tom Hardy, you see two Germans.
Yes,
and that's
but they're out of focus.
yeah.
And
yeah,
they're in the
out of
background,
focus.
right?
And yeah, you never see the Luftwaffe pilots at all. You
Right.
just see the bucket of bolts that was up in the sky, like screaming down, dive bombing. Like,
Yeah.
I will say there was I understand from a narrative perspective why Christopher Nolan only focused on the one family and their little boat driving across the channel. But at the end, when the little boats arrive, Kenneth Branagh is looking through the binoculars and he sees like this whole fleet of them out in the channel, and he's like, I see home. And I'm like, where were all these other little boats? Like, why did we only see the one little boat crossing the channel with Mark Rylance, and now suddenly there's hundreds of little boats like just off the French coast? Like, why didn't we never saw any other little boats in the channel when he would pan out and the little boat was rescuing like the downed RAF pilots? Like, why didn't we see other little boats?
You never saw the Armada coming.
Right,
Because all of a sudden it was there.
The Dorset Armada.
Right.
Right.
So that was a bit of a leap too. I mean, maybe that was some sort of dramatic reveal.
Right.
But
for random people who don't know the little boat story.
or even just to build tension is
Right.
like, well, are they going to make it? Are all those little boats going to make it across the channel to?
Right.
And then, by the way, they've got to get back.
Right.
And we didn't really see much of that either.
Yeah, no, we just saw them pulling up into the marina, and then they're on a train, and random people on the platform are passing beers like through the window to Harry Styles. Like,
Yeah, I just didn't think it was worth the praise. I mean, it was a good movie and everything, but I'd
give it a solid B.
Would you give it a solid B?
I'd give it a B, yeah.
I'd give it a solid 6 out of 10.
Wow, so you're in like D territory.
I'm like, I wasn't
Wow.
feeling it. And maybe it's just because I'm not a war movie guy.
Yeah, you don't like World War II movies.
Well, not war in general. I mean, I'm not really despite what I said earlier about blood and gore, I'm not really entertained by death anymore. As you get older and you have kids, your life changes a little bit.
I know, I mean, I have a dog, so I hear you.
Right, exactly. You wouldn't want to watch a bunch of dogs storming the beach. And then German shepherds on the other side of the dune barking at them.
And there's like the French poodle who steals the clothing from like the bulldog who he's burying on the beach.
So we've got all the stereotypes fully in action here.
I think I found like Pixar's latest movie.
I think this is one of those puppies movies that we were watching.
Like Air Bud in Space or whatever we watched. Like
Pupkirk.
Pupkirk. Oh my God. Please, somebody call us.
Disney.
Right.
Disney and Marvel. Line 2.
I love it. I think this is a fantastic idea.
I think we've got a whole different area of entertainment lined up.
And the German Shepherds.
And the German Shepherd.
Or what, Alsatians? That's what the
and you
British
know
call
what?
them, right?
Well, you know what would happen is the Labrador dogs would be the peacemakers because they're Canadian.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
They'd be standing in the middle going, can we just talk? or whatever they say in Labrador.
And the St. Bernard will be off in Switzerland getting drunk on his little...
on his little barrel.
Yeah. I'm neutral, folks.
Stereotypes are us.
Right. This is amazing. I think we have to do this.
I think we should follow this up. I think we should terminate this podcast right now and start writing.
All right. Let's
start
do it.
scripting. All right. Well, this is a nice little burst on Dunkirk for you and some thoughts about Pupkirk and maybe other sequels that could come of it.
I mean, you could do World War One with dogs. You could do World War II. You could do...
The world would be a better place.
If dogs were running things.
If dogs were running things.
Right.
We'd have treats.
Yeah.
Although the excrement factor would be off the charts.
Especially with my dog. Like, oh my God. I saw a meme on Facebook yesterday that, because yesterday was Friday, and it said, I don't want to adult today. I don't even want a human today. Today I want to dog. I want to lie in the sun on the floor and have people bring me treats and rub my belly. And I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty good right now.
Wow, that does sound pretty good.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound too bad at all.
So the world would be a better place if dogs were in charge.
And the world is a better place for our podcast.
That's correct.
And for another week, I'm not Coco.
And I'm not Dalt.